Yes, people, what's happening? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another video. First things first, guys, make sure you show the video some love. Smash the like button, subscribe if you're new around here, and as always, leave your thoughts in the comments below. And in today's video, going to be discussing the reasons why it is unfair to judge Chelsea's £1 billion spend under Todd Boehly and Clearlake. Now, obviously every time Chelsea don't do well or a poor result happens or whatever, the money always gets mentioned. First things first, it's really important to clarify that Chelsea have not spent £1 billion as of yet. They have committed to spending that money on new signings. And yet every time we don't do well, it gets mentioned. In the first three windows, it is a vast expenditure. There's no doubt about it. That expenditure sets the parameters for both expectations and then the criticism that comes with it. And obviously the big one being, in the Carabao Cup final, Gary Neville calling us the blue £1 billion bottle jobs, etc. And for a lot of people, they're not bothered about any further analysis of the £1 billion. They don't look any further into that. They just see that 1 billion number that grabs the headlines, but they don't actually look into it and see how it's been spent, where it's been spent, like the amount of money spent on signings. How many minutes have those signings actually seen? And there's been an article in The Athletic today, and I'm so glad this has happened because it really importantly highlights, how many minutes these signings have actually played, and whether it's fair to judge the £1 billion spend at this point in time. And there's some really interesting findings in this article, actually. It is very interesting, and we're going to dive into some of it now. I mean, first thing to remember, guys, is that, talking about the £1 billion spend, Chelsea did recoup more than £300 million through player sales in that same period. Since they took over in 2000 and at the end of 2020, in the summer of 2022. The Athletic estimates that Boehly and Clearlake have committed £977.5 million to transfer and loan fees in the first three windows, with add-ons likely to take the eventual spend into 10 figures. We kind of know this. Firstly, what I do want to say on this is that in the short term, the returns on the money being spent and the signings so far, there's no debate about it. The short-term returns on the big investment have been absolutely shockingly bad. You only have to look at the Premier League table, look at how we're playing this season, and we're facing the very real prospect, guys, of a second consecutive season spent almost entirely in mid-table and missing out on potentially any European football or just being in the Conference League. And look, yes, we've been deeply inconsistent, underwhelming results, underwhelming performances. But there's a really important question here, is that how much of the £1 billion spend have Chelsea actually seen on the pitch in the last 2 years? And you'd be very, very surprised. I'm going to bring it up on screen now. There's several things to dive into, and we're going to get into it right now, people. So the first thing to be highlighted is that a whopping £303.9 million, or 31% of the total Boehly Clearlake transfer spend in the first three windows of their ownership, has barely been seen on the pitch at all. So it's obviously split into four brackets, available minutes in all competitions between 0 and 25%. £303.9 million of that spend has barely seen the pitch. We're talking the likes of Wesley Fofana, Christopher Nkunku, Romeo Lavia. Yes, of course, some players that are out on loan will be included in that, but that makes up a vast percentage of the available minutes in all competitions, where players have not even played 25% of those available minutes. When you look at the players that have played 50 to 75%, it's a small slice, as is the 25 to 50%. So you can already see here the picture that is starting to be being painted. You know, so many players have been missing. You know, so many players have been missing, and it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. Yes, of course, it will include like Slanina, Casadei, Datro Fofana, Andre Santos, Angelo, David, Washington, etc., who've spent most of the time out on loan or in a development squad. And yeah, look, obviously their lack of short-term contribution is obvious. But obviously they fully believe that one day these guys will turn into potential stars, or at the very minimum grow into, you know, assets which can be sold on for a profit. And then I think the main ones are Wesley Fofana, Nkunku, and Lavia. £176 million worth of purchases, who were expected to play big first team roles, but that's been derailed by injuries, which is deeply frustrating. You know, Fofana's only played 20.3% of the available minutes in all competitions since he joined the club, and Nkunku's just only played 11.4%, and Lavia just 0.9%. We know that Fofana's not featured at all this season, and that Lavia is literally going to only play 33 minutes. And Nkunku hasn't played a lot either. He's played nearly 300 fewer minutes than Amanda Broja, who went on loan to Fulham in January. So you can see here how this is looking, and you can understand that, you know, actually there is a reason why perhaps we're not doing well as we should be, and why it's really important to, you know, apply more context to these things. Football fans famously don't like to apply context, but it's really important to apply context. When you look at it here and you see a large percentage of first team signings that have not even contributed between 0 and 25% of minutes, you can understand why we're struggling slightly and why it's unfair just to chuck that £1 billion, or we've wasted £1 billion, you know, always gets chucked about, but there's no further context applied to it. And it's really great that this article's been done to show just quite how ridiculous our situation has been. Over half of the £1 billion spent hasn't seen more than 50% of the minutes available on the pitch. How can you judge something and say, you know, oh, we've wasted £1 billion, it's been an absolute failure? Short term, absolutely, you know, the return has not been good. But you can't write yourself as a failure when over 50% of these signings haven't even seen 50% of the fucking minutes on the pitch. Over half of the billion, haven't even seen more than half the minutes on the pitch that have been available in all competitions. You know, I just think it's grossly unfair to come to that judgment. You can understand why that judgment has been reached. Of course you can, you know, rival fans, media, etc. You know, that's the sort of thing that they do. Again, another diagram here, the top 10 most expensive Boehly Clear Lake signings and their percentage of available minutes played. Obviously, Enzo and Caicedo, the two most expensive, have played a lot of minutes. You know, they've been pretty durable. Wesley Fofana has played 20.3% of the minutes. Mudryk, 39.3%, not getting a run. Cucurella likewise has been injured. In Nkunku, we know injuries. Sterling has played a reasonable amount of minutes, but for the marquee signing back in 2022, he's been pretty useless, in fairness. And then Cole Palmer and Disasi, who arrived this summer, have played a large amount of the minutes. And yeah, Palmer's been an exceptional signing, and Disasi, in fairness to him, has done a solid job. But you can just see there how much red and orange there is on that table. And that's just the top 10 most expensive signings. Not having a Fofana, a Lavia, Nkunku, etc. available for large parts of, if not all of the season, makes a big difference. I fully believe that a fully fit Wesley Fofana is part of Chelsea's best defence. Nkunku is is definitely part of Chelsea's best team, as I believe Romeo Lavia is as well. And it's quite clear that the whole plans are kind of built around Nkunku, and there wasn't really any idea of how we were going to adapt, and we did look quite lost without him. And hopefully next season he can find his feet. But it is, I just think with all these players that have been missing, the amount of minutes they've missed, I just think it is slightly unfair to judge this £1 billion spend as a complete failure and a waste of money, when over half of that money spent hasn't even played 50% of of the available minutes. That is the reality of the situation, guys. Yes, what's been on the pitch should be performing slightly better and hasn't been good enough. But the fact of the reality is that we haven't got all the tools at our disposal, or even 3/4 of the tools at our disposal that we've been paid for. You know, it's like building a house and you turn up and in your toolbox or whatever, or in the van, you get there and over half the materials you spend money on aren't there and you can't use them. You've got to find a different way of doing it. Obviously, it's not going to be quite as good. Yes, you can still get maybe a half decent product, but ultimately, I just think you can't really judge this spend until you see like all of the players available and on the pitch and playing regular minutes. Now, of course, with Chelsea, are we ever going to get to that situation given our injury record and what's going on? I'd like to think we can get there. You know, obviously, it is interesting. You know, only 4 players have been on the pitch for more than 75% of Chelsea's available first team minutes since arriving at the club. That's Enzo, Caicedo, Disasi, and Cole Palmer. And those guys have been mainstays in Pochettino's team selection. Of course, you know, amount of minutes plays is not an indicator of whether a signing is successful or not. We know that Enzo and Caicedo have struggled this season with such a big workload and a lot of minutes played. But it does, you know, hammer home the fact that they are regarded as key figures in the team that's being built together at Stamford Bridge, and they're afforded that time to, you know, they're afforded that time to sort of play through bad form and try and come through the other side of it and learn from their mistakes, etc. And paying that much money for these guys is a kind of a gift and a curse in that sense. A gift because they get to sort of play through it and the mistakes, so the price tag dictates that. And then, of course, you know, by paying that much, these young kids have been saddled with impossible expectations at a time when they're both still developing their skill set. But it is an interesting one. It really is an interesting one. Like I'm so glad this has been done. It is fascinating reading. You know, it really is. So it's a strange one. But I think it's important that I do maintain that the bigger picture does offer some signs of improvement for sure. I think it really does. You know, and I think when you look back at the window in 2022 when Boehly was kind of prominent in the signings, that window has looked like a complete disaster. Aubameyang's gone, Koulibaly's gone, a few others have gone, etc., etc. But yes, these directors haven't done well enough. But from sort of the last summer onwards, I think there have been more signings right than not right. You know, it's important. You know, there's going to be fans that are going to criticize the ownership, and I've criticized the ownership for things that they've done. There's a lot of things they've not done well enough, but they've, you know, that believe they spent the £1 billion so badly, but then don't look at the fact that nearly a third of that has barely been seen on the pitch for the first team, with only a handful really of the signings establishing themselves as mainstays under Pochettino. But then you can also, other people will look at the same figures and argue it shows a heavily future-focused transfer strategy, which absolutely is correct. And maybe it's been undermined in the short term by bad injury luck, but it still does retain like a huge long-term upside. And the reality of the situation is, guys, that it might be years before there's a definitive answer to the argument or whatever. And of course, the fortunes on the pitch for the Blues are massive in these coming seasons. But the reality is, guys, as Chelsea fans, whether we like it or not, from now until we get back to where we want to be, you can expect the word £1 billion to be banded around all over the place. It'll be the main, you know, word used when there's discourse discussed around Boehly, Clearlake, etc. Because at the end of the day, money just blinds everything, blinds people's judgment. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting video to do, people. You know, the fact that so many of us just write off, this is a dreadful £1 billion spent. When you actually dive into the numbers, you see how ridiculous the situation is and how we have been kind of fighting with one hand tied behind our backs. But yeah, guys, that's just my thoughts on the £1 billion spend. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, whether you agree or disagree. Smash the like, subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll catch you again in another one soon. Up the Chelsea, and peace out.